I'd like to start this presentation with a story about my son, Daniel, when he's 25 now, and he was 13 at the time, and he was a cheeky teenager and coming into his young power, and I was going off at him about something, and he looked, and he was the same height as me at that time. He looked me in the eye and he said, "Dad, get over it." And I cooled down a bit, and then I reflected on what he said to me, and what he was really saying was that the problem that I was having with him was actually coming from me and how I was communicating with him, and that part of the solution could come from how I could change myself. And I can't help thinking that this is really a perfect analogy of our food system, in that we the urban population of Australia, and indeed of many other parts of the world, are the consumers of the food system. And over the years, the food system has become so disconnected from people in cities. It's no longer part of our culture. It was removed from education. Food growing was taken out of cities. And so to us in cities, food has become a commodity. Food grown has become a commodity. And so we've removed our responsibility for that whole very basic part of our humanness of growing food. It's been handed over to the other guys. And really, in handing over that responsibility, things have happened which now, on reflection, are not really too healthy for us. We have, small numbers of companies controlling our food system. We have chemically grown food, available that people are only starting to wake up that it's really affecting the way they are. And there's the whole cultural value of food. I mean, it's being shared on TV in food growing, in cooking programs, but really the whole thing of food growing was removed from our culture. So I think that urban food growing is a new frontier, in a sense of enabling people in the cities to gain some power again back in the food system. So it's similar to that situation with my son. Okay. So my journey started in food growing when I was a child. I had my first veggie patch when I was 10, and I still remember the flavour of the carrots my first carrots I proudly grew, and the apricots that we harvested from our tree at home, and it's still there, and that was 45 years ago, and it's still producing beautiful apricots that my dad harvests each year. This photograph here is my son Joe, another one of my children, proudly looking at a broccoli that I grew in my back garden. So it's a long way forward into the future. But in my childhood in Melbourne, in suburbia Melbourne, really there was not much food growing. People had fruit trees, and in my own family there was no connection to farming. There was, we bought food from the shop, and I had my little veggie garden. I thought, yeah, there's something that's holding me to this, but I'm not quite sure what it is other than the taste. But I do remember there are a lot of Greeks and Italian people moving into the area that I lived in, and they seem to have this quirky habit of not having lawns, of not feeding mowers. They had food all throughout their grassy areas. So, hey, they had the same stuff as we had. They had children, houses, work and what have you, and yet they grew food. It was part of their culture, and we didn't. So, as I went into my adulthood, I joined the city workers, and I became an accountant and worked in information systems. Had 4 children, and I was still growing food on a small scale, but it was gradually growing, and I realised with the food that food growing, in being in that heady environment in the city and the type of work that I was doing, that getting connected to the earth each day or each weekend was helping me to be sane. So, and when I think it was about 17 years ago, we as a family decided that we would start eating organic food. Only we would, and that really kind of opened a doorway. It was like that seed that I'd planted as a child in the little vegetable garden was just starting to germinate, and the choice of eating organic food really, it cost us more, and I decided to start growing more food, and that demanded an education in organic and biodynamic growing, permaculture, a whole range of things to deepen my experience of growing food. And it enabled me to look inside our food system where I hadn't looked inside of it before, and to see that in different parts of the world, people were really getting into this whole local food system, or in Europe, it's been part of their culture for a very long time. And in Australia, which is probably quite similar to America, our food was always out there. Well, it wasn't always, but it was moved out away from us in cities. And I got involved in community groups around food growing, and formed groups in our area in Brisbane of local growers, and we had markets and all sorts of things, and they still continue. And I realised out of that experience that connecting with people around food was a really powerful experience. It was an enjoyable cultural experience, and that's what you can't get when you go into a supermarket. There's no cultural experience. So I think that decision to eat organic food was a really key influence on me. And that really led me into the business that I have, City Food Growers, where I wanted to turn that passion into my work. And as I said earlier, the business is about getting people in and around cities to grow their own food and to connect around it. So it's been a really interesting and challenging journey with this business, because urban food growing is a bit like a Back to the Future thing. It really happened a long time ago and we forgot about it, and now it's starting to move a bit. And now we have a few things we do in our business. We've got the largest organic gardening website in Australia. That's 10,000 people a month use that website, and we do workshops teaching people organic and biodynamic gardening. Hundreds of people each year come to those workshops, and I do consulting work for individuals as well as big organisations. It was interesting listening to the last presentation about planning, because we've been doing work with Mirvac, a property developer, on getting urban agriculture integrated into a large residential estate on the Gold Coast, a very big estate, and they're working with the Gold Coast City Council on land use models to allow for commercially sustainable urban agriculture in an estate. So, and another big project which I'll talk about later involved in early childhood. So those sort of, and growing a lot of food. I mean, we've increased our food production, and we sell food. I run a market at my children's school, selling our own food. So there's hands in the dirt, teaching, consulting, and our internet presence. All exciting stuff. Okay, so what are my observations after being so intimately involved in this urban food thing for many years now, and connecting with lots of people in Australia and around the world on it? I think definitely the interest is growing. the food volume is increasing, but it's not increasing with the level of interest. It's like people get excited about growing some food, and then as soon as it gets hard, you know, they start messing around with their soil and the pests come in and it all gets a bit challenging. They give up. And I think it's particularly difficult for people in cities because most people in cities have money in their pockets and there's a shop down the road. So when a challenge is presented, they can give up. It's easy for them to do that. It's not for a farmer because that's his living, you know. He keeps going and he gets over the hurdles and learns by the challenges that are presented each day. So I think people in the cities, to really engage themselves in this thing of food growing, they kind of have to look deeper into themselves as to what's really driving them to get over the challenge because food growing can be learnt by anyone. I mean, hey, it's part of us as human beings. We were growing food before supermarkets came along. So it's not that we can't do it, we've just kind of moved it out of our consciousness a bit. And so I think that getting that fire inside of you as an individual living in urban environments to keep going and growing food is a really important thing to get over the challenges. So that's my observations. And what's the doorway we're at right now? Well, you know, the critical thing in our food system is farmers. I mean, the farmers are getting pretty old in this country, and there's a very small percentage of people in this country that are growing food. And the economic system, the very tough market system that exists here is making it more and more difficult for farmers to survive economically. So if there's no farmers, where does the food come from? All the other problems of soil degradation, water, climate change, transport of food from this end of Australia to the other, they're all big problems, but they're not as big a problem as the lack of participation in farming, because without farmers we don't have food. Unless we choose to import all our food, which, hey, you know, the bulk of the processed food in supermarkets now is imported. And Australia is now importing quite a large percentage of fruit and vegetables. And really, the government says we're a major exporter of food, but it's mostly just wheat and beef. When you look at all the other foods, that's not the case. So there's a doorway here where we've got a big problem with participation coming along. We have increasing urban populations, increasing interest in food. What do we do? Okay. Urban food growing is in a number of manifestations. There's community gardens, backyard gardens, school gardens. But commercially sustainable urban food growing is a new frontier in a sense. It's how is land used in cities, private land and public land, to grow food commercially. That is really the new frontier. And this is a frontier that is being pushed in many countries of the world now, where they're aggressively moving into more sustainability of their food system. Scandinavia is a really wonderful, the Scandinavian countries are a wonderful example of totally embracing locally grown food. And in the USA, there's a lot of movement towards using land in cities. In Vancouver is an interesting example of food being grown in cut-down shipping containers on contaminated land. So the food is lifted up above the soil, it's on contaminated land and concrete. And there's 5 acres of food production, financially sustainable food production in cut-down shipping containers. So they're cut in half. Food is grown, people are being engaged there as urban farmers, making a living. Now, that's pretty amazing to use that and to use contaminated land. I mean, we've got in Brisbane where I live, there's parks everywhere. Why do we have to have more gum trees in parks? Why don't we allocate some of that land for market gardens? We need food. We can't eat gum trees. So I think this new frontier of commercially sustainable urban farming is pushing the boundaries, but it's possible to grow on small pieces of land, an acre and a half intensive organic growing. A person can make a living doing it if they sell directly. They have to sell directly. Okay, land access. I haven't got a lot of time left. So land access models on public land. There needs to be a way for the only way that this urban agriculture thing can work to a financially sustainable basis for the grower is if they don't pay for the land. So say on public land, and say it's in a park, for instance, the land, and this model is being used in other parts of the world, is that the land is leased on a very low rent, say a peppercorn rent. And the endeavour is looked at as one that is economic, environmentally and community valuable. So local councils are prepared to look at it and say, okay, you know, there's a service that's being provided to communities here, and it's also a business. With private land, Landshare is an organisation in the UK that is growing hugely by allowing people who own private land to make it available to food growers, and generally in exchange for a small amount of money or food. So there's plenty of land around cities to be used. It's just a way to access it. And for planning authorities to start looking at this and say, how can we do it? Education. There's food growing is getting into our education system, and wow, is getting into our education system, and it's expanding, and we're involved in a big project in the early childhood area and in the state school, high schools it's getting in, but there really isn't a lot of education in this area of how do we create a pathway for people to become a financially sustainable urban farmer. That's what's needed. Incredible community benefits for people connecting to food, and I think it's anyone who's been in a garden growing food with people will know that. Well, 11 seconds. Other aspects, I've mentioned those. Okay, so your part in the solution, 3 things. The first is to grow some of your own food, and if you're growing some now, grow more. The next is to support any urban food growing initiative that you know of. And the third is when you buy food as in a thinking way where you want it to represent how the food system to be. So don't support organisations that sell toxic food or, you know, destroy the viability of farmers. Don't support them. It's your dollars. Okay, thank you.